If there is one thing that the internet is sure of, it's that there's something off about Japanese commercials. Sure, some of the indecipherability comes from a simple language barrier. Without the benefits of subtitles, a non-Japanese speaker could find it hard to understand what's going on in them. And even in today's increasingly global world, often even the brand being advertised can be an unknown. Do you know what SoftBank is? Or au? Or Hapitas? Yes, the world of advertising in Japan can be ridiculous and strange and befuddling to Western audiences. But is that simply a matter of language? Or are there other qualities that make them so unique to our Western acclimated brains?
みんなの平和を守るヒーロー。外壁リフォームは温泉。すいません。
スイカどんだけ安いか調べて関連が
得しちゃう。ラララランドマーク。
家の電気とガスを。
駅で受け取りもスムーズ。スムーズだ。すげえ。
かゆみがええな。
それがハワイだ、ジョーンズ。
休みます。
Welcome to Adventures in Advertising, Commercials of Japan. I'm your host, Victor Frost. Here at Frostworks, we produce a bevy of eclectic, entertaining, and educational content. Or at least 2 out of 3. We also conduct original research on media and internet culture, sharing our methods and results openly with the world. However, we couldn't do any of this without the help of our Patreon supporters. If you like videos like this, please consider becoming a patron yourself. Link in the description. Today, we're going to be taking a look at Japanese television advertising and try to understand them from both a structural and stylistic standpoint to see if we can make some generalizations about them in the same way we would about other genres of media. To do this, we're not only going to look at aesthetic qualities of the commercials, visuals, editing, sound, etc., but also how they fulfill their primary function in being commercials. That is to say, how do they convince consumers to purchase their product or use their service? What arguments do they make? What information do they present? Now, I'm not the first person to ask these questions. In 1987, Jotaka Ramaprasad and Kazumi Hasegawa, a professor and grad student respectively at Michigan State University, conducted a study analyzing the informational content of 410 primetime television commercials in Japan. And 2 years later, they conducted another study, this time of 373 Japanese commercials. And the results they found were interesting, but we'll get to those later. Using their studies as models, I decided to replicate their research methodology. However, unlike Ramaprasad and Hasegawa, I wasn't looking to prove or disprove a hypothesis. I was simply looking to collect data and make observations based on that data. I figured I could look at their results, look at my results, and see if and how things have changed over time. But there were a few problems. The first was this. They had people on the ground in Japan tuning their VCRs to TV stations and recording whatever aired during the specified times. I neither live in nor have people in Japan to do that. Thankfully, the internet being the internet, there are several YouTube channels dedicated to uploading Japanese commercials in full HD. The channel I picked was JPCM HD, and I downloaded all of the commercials they had from December 2017 through April 2018, roughly the same span of time used in both studies. This came out to 428 commercials in total. I didn't know if the commercials uploaded were selected at random, like in the Ramaprasad Hasegawa study, or if they were selected based on the uploader's personal preferences, or if they're simply all of the commercials the person recorded. Not knowing this means an argument could be made that the data I collected is not scientifically rigorous enough, and that there could be biases in my dataset that I'm just not aware of. Problem number 2. I don't speak Japanese. I mean, sure, I could maybe muddle through a conversation, barely, but I don't have nearly the language skills necessary to understand, like, any high-level concepts, and I definitely don't understand weird cultural tropes. This ties into perhaps the most important step I could have taken in this project, And it was spurred by an even larger problem, which was problem number 3. There was a ton of data to collect. See, in order to fully replicate the data sets and the studies I based my methodologies on, I wrote and ran a script to pull American commercials along with their metadata from iSpot.tv, 481 commercials to be exact. This, combined with the Japanese commercials, adds up to over 900 commercials in total to be analyzed. And this isn't so much a problem, but just a lot of work. And more importantly, this is my chance to thank some very important people. For this project, Frostworks brought on a team of skilled and dedicated researchers. 2 teams, actually. One of fluent Japanese speakers for the Japanese commercials, and another team for the American commercials. In total, we hired 12 amazing researchers. Yes, hired as in paid, none of this unpaid internship nonsense. They did a ton of the heavy lifting on this project by gathering all of the data we will be referring to today, and none of this would be possible without their efforts. Alright, so let's begin with a fun game. I'm going to play some commercials and I want you to take note of when you can identify what is being advertised in each one. You can even put the times in a comment below. And remember, this isn't about you being familiar with the brand or the product or service, only that you can recognize what it is that's being advertised. Ready? Here we go.
初売りは歩いてこないから鈴木に行くんだね
安心の鈴木セーフティーサポート搭載車が勢ぞろい
鈴木の初売り3日から
さすがうちのエース。
このままじゃエースになれない。
いや勝負はこれからだ
もしかしてだけど資格を取ってステップアップ狙ってるんじゃないのなら勇敢じゃない
なぜか上だけなぜか上だけ
もう食べたソフトクリームの上だけソフ
まずは経済政策から始めようよ違うだろ少子化対策だろ外交問題なめんじゃねえぞちゃんと話し合おうぜド派手になやばいなんかカップル
Alright, pencils down. So, I would guess that most of you had a bit of a hard time following those commercials. Well, whoever wrote those ads certainly didn't do you any favors. There are 2 rules of thumb that I learned in college about making television commercials. First is that the audience should be able to understand the commercial even if it's on mute. Now, why is that? Well, because ads typically run from 15 to 30 seconds to a minute at most, Super Bowl notwithstanding, they need to make the most of the time they have. So if the ad can't be understood without voiceover or dialogue, then it's not effectively using its visual component to convey the story or information to you, the audience. Of course, as with any rule of thumb, there are exceptions. For instance, if your brand is already firmly embedded in the cultural knowledge of the market, then you can get away with being a bit less gung-ho about it because your audience is already very aware of your brand. Slogans and jingles are a great example of this.
The best part of waking up is Folgers in your cup
Maybe she's born with it
Maybe it's Maybelline
Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
Hey Dave.
With that rule of thumb in mind, if we look at this commercial, even if we were all Japanese, we would have no idea what it would be advertising until 11 seconds in when the first bit of on-screen text appears. 11 seconds! That's more than 2/3 of the way through the commercial. Which brings us neatly to the second rule of thumb. The audience should be able to identify the brand of the commercial within the first third of it. That means by 5 seconds for a 10-second spot, 10 seconds for a 30-second spot, or 20 seconds for a 60-second spot. This rule of thumb, both of them, really, actually came into existence because of the invention of the most disruptive innovation in television technology, the TV remote. In its early years, TV was treated much the same the way radio was, tuned to a channel and left on. But in the 1950s, president of Zenith Technologies, Eugene F. McDonald, called upon the engineers of the company for a solution to a problem. He hated sitting through commercials and wanted something that could let him mute the TV or change the channel without having to get up and walk to the TV to do it. And so in 1956, the first modern wireless TV remote was born. The Zenith Space Command. Using ultrasonic technology and completely battery-free, it made it possible for consumers to easily and conveniently escape commercials, and was singularly responsible for the invention of the term zapping, to switch channels in order to avoid commercials. Soon enough, marketers realized that the only way to defeat the remote and its dreaded zapping was to front-load the brand information in the commercial, so that even if you switched channels or muted the TV, you at least saw the product or the brand being advertised. In contrast to that philosophy, the ramen commercial you watched earlier had its logo on the very bottom corner of the screen for about half a second. It got rid of it, then didn't show it again until literally the last second of the commercial. You spent more time looking at it now than you did during the entire duration of the ad. Now, not all Japanese commercials are this unintelligible. And in fact, I should point out that if you can understand Japanese and had the audio on, you'd likely be able to figure out the brand and product being advertised much more quickly. But that being said, commercials like the Old Man and the Sea over here are not uncommon either. This wasn't some cherry-picked example. So then, what do Japanese people get from these? When Japanese companies talk to Japanese audiences, what do they say? Well, while most of the commercials were for a bunch of vastly different products or services, the two biggest single categories were food and beverage items or video games. One of the things we specifically looked for in our research were the different types of informational cues. In the survey the researchers used to collect the data for each commercial, I provided them with 14 categories of informational cues, the same used by Ramaprasad and Hasegawa, as well as the opportunity to fill in their own information, and they were told to select as many categories as they felt were applicable. Here we can see the top 5 categories, and based on the data they collected, the most common type of informational cues present in the commercials was information about the components or contents of the product. This makes sense. The most important thing to convey to a consumer is what they get when they buy the thing. That being said, this is a flexible label and can apply to just about every commercial for a physical product, be it skin lotion, food, video games, applesauce, whatever. What I personally found interesting, though, was how infrequently the quality of the product comes up in their commercials. In American commercials, well, quality is what we talk about the most. You can't get us to shut up about it. Verizon has the most coverage. The Toyota Tacoma is the most dependable pickup truck according to J.D. Power and Associates. The Google Pixel 3 has the best, mostest smartphone camera. In fact, for as much of a reputation as Japanese products have for being well-made and reliable, you'd think they'd lean on that a little bit more. In terms of what broad types of appeals they used, when Ramaprasad and Hasegawa did their study, they found that roughly 75% of commercials relied on emotional appeals rather than informational ones. For me, well, I didn't follow Ramaprasad and Hasegawa's method exactly when it came to this. See, when they were looking at informational cues, they decided that either a commercial could try to appeal to consumers with emotion or with information. Never both. Which, I don't know about you, but I think that's kind of crap, right? I mean, in terms of effectiveness, the best commercials leverage both your sense of reason as well as your emotions. If they didn't, how could they get you to rationalize buying something you don't need? The weird thing is that they acknowledge this. Quote, "At the same time, only a few Japanese commercials do not use information cues at all." But let's compare the numbers. For the sake of going more apples to apples, anytime a commercial had both informational and emotional appeals, I added that to both categories. Compared to 30 years ago, the number of Japanese commercials with emotional appeals stayed pretty much the same. But the amount of informational appeal-based commercials has gone down quite a bit. Meanwhile, there are lots of commercials where my researchers couldn't identify what kind of appeal was even in play. Well, what does this mean? Well, it could be that the commercials are so confusing, even to people who speak Japanese, that it's just not understandable. This could be due to cultural context they don't know about, or it could be that the commercial itself is just so weird that no one can understand it, which frankly seems somewhat likely. On the other hand, American commercials have an almost 50-50 split between emotional and logical cues. So this could mean that Japanese consumers respond more to emotional cues than Americans do. So, now that we've addressed what kind of information the commercials are trying to convey, let's move on to how they're conveying it in terms of the artistic aspects of the commercials themselves. Just as a side note, I have lots of friends who got their degree in film theory, and that's great and all, and they always have something cool to teach me, but I'm a production guy. And so we're not going to talk about visual symbology or the psychology of color theory. We're going to stick to how things affect stuff in more practical terms, and look at what these commercials do rather than why. We'll talk about the why, but don't expect me to be quoting Hitchcock. Anywho, you're going to watch some commercials now, and while you do, I would like for you to think about what stands out to you about them from a visual perspective. What makes them visually feel different from commercials you might be used to here in North America?
付き合いたい。
君にプレゼントしたいもの、それは自信。
自信？
自信をつければうまくいくさ。
きっと告白成功するわ。
君が告白されるかも。
私が告白してやる。全身自信銀座から。先輩、仮想通貨って知ってます？
知ってる。最近よく聞くよね。
中でもビットコインですよね。
知ってる。もうめちゃくちゃ早いよね。
ビットコインって見えないけど存在してるんですよね。
そうなんだよね。しかもさ、ボワって驚かしてくるよね。
ビットコインは脅かしませんよ。
あれ？そうだっけ？
先輩、本当に分かってます？
うん、すっごい知ってる。仮想で通貨はビットイン。DMM ビットコイン。
いい部屋見つかった？まだなんだよね。
教授じゃねえよ。
ああ、ひなこのスマホ。そう。いや食べ過ぎ。
スマホがあればいい部屋ちゃん。画像もいっぱい。
おお。ちょっとここ大学よ。私踊る。
素直になれよひなこ。
いい部屋ネットで探そう。
ガイガイチャンスリゾート当たる。
行きまーす。
いや顔はいい。
これなんやろ？これ盆栽？さやけどこの G って何？グローバル社の G なん？それがなんで盆栽なん？普通の不動産会社と違うの？
お答えしよう。グローバル社は世界の不動産を面白くする会社です。
グローバル社よろしくね。
いらっしゃい。
すごいですね、ひまわり。
いいよ。採用。
その髪はディアボーテひまわり。
暮らしへ。
ダイナミック JTB ついにデビュー。移動も宿泊もセットでお得。いつでも最新価格なのに安心サポートも。あなただけの自由旅に出かけましょう。海外も国内もダイナミック JTB いよいよデビュー。侍がデートしてた。やるじゃん。こっちこっち。じゃあはいバレンタインチョコじゃなくてバレンタインジャンボ。
グリーンジャンボはバレンタインジャンボへ。水曜から。
ビットフライヤービットフライヤーみんなで歌おう。ビットフライヤービットフライヤー明日は晴れるさ。ビットフライヤービットフライヤー。
世界を変えるコインビットコインはビットフライヤー。
制服派手だな。
最大3ヶ月ただがく割。
ただごとじゃにゃいな。
22番注目の白藤二郎選手です。ゆっくりと滑り出して
スピードいいですよ。
飛び出した。強い踏み切りです。距離が伸びる。
犬らしい姿勢です。
ぐんぐん伸びる。綺麗な着地。K 点を超えたか。すごいジャンプ。犬が犬年に大ジャンプ。おや、審判が何やら揉めています。
犬は競技に出られないので失格とします。
今言うことじゃないだろう。
規則です。
そもそも出場させるなよ。
いいじゃない、犬年だから。
いいじゃないですか。
いいじゃないですか。常識外れでいいじゃないですか。チャレンジしたっていいじゃないですか。自分は自分でいいじゃないですか。もっと平和でいいじゃないですか。犬年だからいいじゃないですか。
まあいいか。
いいじゃないですか。
So there are a few things I often notice when I watch Japanese commercials. First off, a lot of them are just overexposed, meaning that they are way brighter than they feel like they should be. You can see this in areas that have white in them. They are just super overblown. Details are totally washed out, and even if the entire scene isn't technically overexposed, most commercials are just brighter than we're really used to. Second, Japanese commercials seem to be remarkably vivid and high contrast. Either through set design or costume design or in post-production or all three of them together, the colors are vibrant and pop out at you. Even in seemingly mundane settings like convenience stores, everything just pops. These two traits combined with fast action or quick editing can lead to a very common feeling that Japanese commercials are just kinda a lot. The fact that these are visible so consistently across so many commercials would seem to suggest that this is not just the style of one or two directors, but one typical in Japanese commercials as a genre. More specifically, Japanese produced commercials. Because there are commercials that, while they air in Japan and are for Japanese companies, are very clearly not Japanese in origin just because of how different they feel. I'm going to play for you two commercials from the same category of product, women's undergarments, and I'd like for you to think about which one was produced in Japan.
胸すごい。肉動いてる。お尻もすごい。
ダイエットじゃありません。マルコです。
30歳、やっと思えた。着飾る美しさよりもありのままの美しさで勝負しようって、今なら自信を持って言える。
無敵の美しさ、心地よさ。ワイヤレスリミットレス。ワイヤレスブラはユニクロ。
So, if you guessed that commercial number 2 for Uniqlo LifeWear wireless bras were produced here in the US, you would be right. It was produced by a company called Droga 5, based out of New York, and it feels like a US commercial. Or at least it doesn't feel like a Japanese one. Moving away from visuals, Japanese ads have this wonderful love affair with jingles that I think we've just lost here in the US. We used to have jingles for everything, but now, apart from a couple of insurance companies, we're pretty jingle free. Meanwhile, Japan is jingle all the way. And I'd like to take a minute to introduce you to a couple of them. Good news though, you probably already know the melodies.
仕事探しはインディード。
バイト探しもインディード。
仕事探しはインディード。
それすっごい似合う。やかましい。
仕事バイト探しはインディード。
バイトするならバイトルアプリ。
コーヒーこぼして恋をした。
すいません。
吹かないで。
ヘイバイトバイトバイトルアプリ。バイトバイトバイトバイトバイトバイトアプリはバイトルだ。ヘイバイトアプリはバイトル。
Just for clarification, most Japanese commercials don't repurpose Americans' children's songs. I just brought up these because I thought they were funny and would serve as good examples. In reality, any music you hear in Japanese commercials is far more likely to be used as background music than anything else. In the process of my research, I did learn an interesting factoid. So you might have noticed that commercials with music tend to put a credit in the bottom of the screen. Well, as it turns out, if a commercial uses a song that was recorded in Japan, they don't have to pay a licensing fee as long as it was within a year of the song's release. Which is a very interesting thing, because here in the US, you have to pay a licensing fee if you so much as look at music funny. Okay, so there is one last thing that I want to talk about, and it's got to do with something that is deeply structural to the genre of commercials as a whole. When you're dealing with ad campaigns, there are two basic types. The first is the one where multiple different ads follow the same basic template or share similar elements. They aren't narratively related and there's no discernible story, they just have stuff in common. Think about the Baito commercials or the most interesting man in the world ad campaign for Dos Equis. The second type is just the opposite. The ads follow a narrative progression and there is a story even if it can be flimsy at times. It is never flimsy for Japanese commercials, not that I've seen. They put way too much effort into them. In the description below are links to a few different Japanese ad campaigns. Which do you think they each are? So where do we go from here? Well, frankly, there is more research to be done. In addition to just gathering data on more commercials, the first thing to do would be to have more researchers look at the commercials we've already collected data for, so that we can fill in any gaps in the data and provide additional data for each commercial, so that we can average it out with what we have in order to filter out any noise or biases. Second, I would like to run some automated image analysis on all of the commercials and find out if the Japanese ones really are brighter or more vibrant on average than American ones. Collect some real data on the look and aesthetic instead of running with a subjective personal analysis. If you'd like to take a closer look at the studies I use both for direct citation and as background research, as well as the complete data set, you can hit the link in the description to go to the project page. And if you have questions or comments, please leave them in the comments below. I always do my best to answer comments on videos like this. Lastly, if you like this video and would like to support this channel, like these fine folks here, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter. Being a Patreon supporter gets you behind the scenes access to ongoing projects, free files and goodies, as well as my personal thanks in every video that I put out. You could also pick up a copy of my mini book, The Economics of Animal Crossing, where I deconstruct the financial world in every copy of Animal Crossing. I'm Victor Frost. Thanks for watching.